Greetings adventurers and welcome to the Loot Goblin Marketplace. Workplace politics can be a dangerous thing to navigate when playing a TTRPG. The last thing you want is a few bad rolls and a short temper to cost you your financial future. And if the problem player in a campaign is your boss, things can get awkward kind of quickly. Now I'm not saying that you can't play a role-playing game with your coworkers, but I am saying that you should be more careful because anything you do at the game table may end up being repeated back to you in an HR meeting. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that they won't settle for the "it's what my character would do" defense. Today's treasure goes by the name Workmate takes TTRPG relationship to crazy Stalker X levels, has an IRL power trip, and loses everything. Let's begin. People can get weirdly attached to their characters, but it takes a special kind of person to take it to the point of threats and verbal assault, stalking, and sabotage. I have been DMing a game for some work friends as a way to introduce some of them to the game alongside some long-term players, so that the game would not only flow a little bit easier, but the requirement for me as a dungeon master to teach the game as a basic level would be alleviated somewhat, so I could concentrate on actual DMing. Now some will say that DMing for workmates is not always a good idea, as it can lead to some IRL issues if things don't go so well. In 20 plus years of TTRPGs as both a dungeon master and as a player, I really never had this issue, beyond some newfound and failed personal romantic relationships that led to some minor issues and some weirdness when in-character romance led to confusion off the table. This was one of those times. The game in and of itself was nothing really to write home about, a basic homebrew setup set on the Sword Coast with some basic plagiarism from Neverwinter with a little Assassin's Creed and Legacy of Kain for flavor. Nothing too spicy, but with enough flavor to keep the veterans interested while being flexible enough for me as the dungeon master to make it easily digestible for the fresh players. It all rather came to a head a little after one of our new players, a pretty generic tiefling warlock, Becca, with a weird flair for the dramatic that I wanted to encourage, got involved in a romance with one of the established players, a vengeance paladin George, who was just on the verge of becoming an oathbreaker after finding out that the object of his vengeful crusade had been a fabrication of his own damaged mind, and that he had been one to do the rather dastardly deed that put him on this path during an extended weekend of drunken debauchery brought about from some spiked ale and a run-in with his emotionally abusive father. It was a weird backstory, a tad grimdark and edgy, but it seemed interesting at the time, so I went with it. This tied in quite well with our little warlock, who had a habit of mixing any and all wild and unusual herbs and random monster bits into concoctions that she would sell in town. For fun, we rolled on a random effects list, all non-lethal, with the D100 to see what the potions did, and it turned out this leaned pretty well with her backstory and patronage to a fey trickster's spirit. At this time, the story was somewhat focused on the paladin and his present ongoing self-loathing, and the party was debating if George was going to break his oath or seek out those that had spiked his drink back in his hometown. Now, I know the party was expecting me to trope this to hell and have the warlock be the one that spiked the drink, etc., but I'm not that kind of dungeon master, and I enjoyed taking expectations like this and tossing them to the wind. But this one had legs, and I kind of wanted it to be more linked to the warlock's patron rather than her as an individual. Sessions passed, and we ended up venturing into the Fey realm to confront the definitely not Summer Lady and her people, which led to the paladin taking a level in warlock himself and focusing his vengeance on those that had actually spiked him rather than the lady herself, and form a much closer bond with the warlock, who in turn started to focus more towards a hexblade build, while the party druid and cleric respectively took bets on when the pair would hook up, and the other new character, a fighter obsessed with rats, as rodents of unusual size and the disposal of them via incredible feats of violence was pretty much the cornerstone of his own backstory, sought out a new and unusual weapon of rodent destruction. Becca and George bonded quite a bit, so much so that it started to spill over in real life, and the pair kinda started dating. I noted with both of them that although I had no issue with this both in character and out of character, if it caused issues at the game table for whatever reason, I would put my foot down as a dungeon master and either remove one or both of them from the game. For a while, all was well, and there was no real issues until the warlock's player got promoted in work. As our new team leader in real life, things started off brilliantly, with her able to set timetables so that we, her, the fighter, and myself would have time off on a Saturday to play and could work Sundays and discuss the previous night's game in our downtime. It really was a dream come true in many respects, at least until the fighter, Sebastian, caused a bit of a ruckus during Becca and George's RP when he headed downstairs after a fade to black moment, and I had turned my attention to the rest of the table while they RP'd Snuggles. Ugh. I don't know what it is about these stories where they have to RP it as a group. I know that the word DM direct message and the word DM dungeon master is very similar to each other, but you can just private message each other whatever raunchy shit you want to do behind closed doors and just get on with the game session. I mean, we have limited time to play here. Honestly, even the build up to the fade to black moment sometimes is just way too long to deal with. You have to respect everyone else's time at the table. Seb, as I pointed out, had a bit of an obsession with rodents, so much so that he had developed an uncanny ability, lucky perception rolls, to always know when a building was infested, and took it upon himself to deal with any scurrying pests for a nominal fee. This had been a fun way to earn some small coin, and the player had really taken to it, even considering ranger levels so that he could lean into it harder. As he was a new player, this enthusiasm had to be encouraged, and thus with snuggle time ongoing, he and the other players opted to head to the basement and play whack-a-mole with the local rodent population for fun and profit. You know, I really respect Seb for finding a fun way to handle the downtime when, you know, they have to sit through the inevitable ERP that their boss and their coworker want to go through every session. Kudos to him, good role playing. This led to them finding out that the former owner of the inn had at one stage been an adventurer himself, and some low-level magic items had been stashed, one of which was a pretty nifty +1 rapier and a +1 buckler, which, after some small debate, it was agreed the fighter should definitely keep. The next day, in real life, was a little odd, as the warlock player seemed a lot sharper than normal and pretty much kept to herself. Nonetheless, the week passed and everything seemed normal until the fighter player found himself scheduled to work on game night. The warlock player offered her apology and made it seem like it was an oversight and said that she would go out of her way to make sure that this wouldn't happen again. Okay. Game night came around, and with no fighter player to take part, he had agreed at work to simply have his character so exhausted by the prior night's mini adventure that he would simply pay for another night at the inn and stay in bed while we hunted the town for our paladin's antagonists or some form of information related to similar incidents. It was at this time Becca piped up and noted that it would be a shame to leave the sleeping fighters' new shiny toys behind when George could use them just as well or better if we ran into trouble. I nixed this idea pretty hard and advised that he was attuning to them, and that was clearly why he was so tired. And even if they could take them from the sleeping fighter, I would have to ask the player if that was okay, as it had been agreed by those that found them that the fighter should have them. She seemed okay with this at the time, so I let it pass in spite of a blatant red flag. Okay, wait. Let me get this straight. So the warlock was ERPing with her boyfriend, and the fighter, being a new player that didn't really want to sit through that, was like, okay, let's do something fun as a side quest, and they were rewarded with some magic items. And you, in probably the most heinous act of metagaming I've ever seen on this channel, schedule him in a way where he has to work on Saturday, misses D&D, and then conveniently you remember during the game, oh wait, didn't he have that cool +1 magic item? You know, since he hasn't really gotten a chance to use it, we should just give it to my boyfriend. You know, that seems fair, right? Yeah, no, you said it right. That is a blatant red flag. Let's continue. Things went fairly smoothly, and once again the party, after a quick chat with the local guard and some sleuthing, I dropped a plot hook that would lead them out of town to a local distillery. Again, the following day, the warlock player seemed oddly distracted and didn't want to discuss the prior night's game, so I filled the fighter in on what happened. And he seemed hyped to test his new toys on the distillery, as it was bound to have rats, lol. What a good sport. The week passes, and once again the fighter found himself scheduled to work on a game night. As I didn't want to move the game on without him, I canceled the session and opted to simply have the lads over for a drink and some pizza, with a declined offer for a one-shot, as they wanted to stay focused on the game in hand. The warlock player opted not to come, so we had a fairly silly night of Mario Kart and beer. It got to about 11 or 12, and I got chatting properly with my longtime table buddy and present paladin player about the game. He confessed that he mentioned being a bit miffed on missing out on the rat catching and a chance of a magical weapon, and had talked with the warlock player about it during their date night. She had seemed upset that he had missed out because of snuggle time and blamed herself for the RP bed-based distraction. He had shrugged it off as, that's just Dungeons & Dragons, and told her that more toys were bound to turn up. It wasn't until an hour or so later that we put 2 and 2 together. This led to a bit of a drunk dial and a bit of a blowout between them when she confessed to intentionally scheduling the fighter away from the table so that the paladin could get the magical items, and that she was going to bring him back when I was more fair. The following day at work was less fun, with the warlock player having a go at me for ruining her relationship and warning me that if I talked about her behind her back, that I would find myself scheduled on every Saturday from this point on. I countered with, well, you'd have a hard time playing the game without a dungeon master, which seemed to shut down the threat pretty damn quickly. Yeah, no, I was about to say that myself. I mean, she's the boss, sure, but you are the dungeon master, so the game doesn't happen if you can't make it. She better pick up a player's handbook and figure out how to play the game if she she wants to be in charge of everything. Saturday came and lo and behold, everyone was free to play, the scheduling issue seemingly resolved, and we got to rolling dice. Again, for a few weeks, things went well. Magic items did in fact turn up, and the story was in fact forthcoming. What also happened is that in-game snuggle time was pretty much off the table, as the Paladin, now significantly more wary of the in real life power games that his new Bae was capable of, opted to keep the party together rather than engage in tabletop randiness. The Warlock was less than happy and took to sulking in real life and only paying lip service to the game before eventually opting to retire character fully and leave the table. One would think that's where this story ends, sadly not. Okay, wait, so because she can't ERP in front of everyone, she quits the game? What is she, an exhibitionist? Why does everyone have to do this in front of people at the table? Come on. Can we please have one relationship story that isn't like this? Alright, back to the story. With no risk of tabletop overspill, the Paladin player and former Warlock continued to date, and work-based D&D chats continued without the potential fallout, and with a keen interest regarding the retired Becca and George's in-character long-distance love life, which was still more or less now an established character point due to the now combined backstory elements. This was fine until mention of any form of Paladin-based flirting or charisma-based interactions were mentioned. He flirted with a barmaid for information and character, nothing more. And once again found myself working a Saturday and the game night being postponed. Oh no, she's jealous of the barmaid. When that failed to deter the Paladin from having an in-character life once again, the fighter found himself on an odd schedule and unable to play. It was especially odd because after the first incident, we opted to keep any events regarding the game, more specifically the Paladin, well out of earshot. Through luck or coincidence, we were able to get around the table together and get a game in with some key story events that there was no way that our former Warlock could possibly know about, that involved the forswearing of the Paladin's firstborn to his Fae patron and a passing off the cuff comment regarding when they were going to do it, as he would have to ask the missus, implying that he was going to procreate with the patron herself to fulfill the bargain. Okay, now the Paladin just wants ERP regardless of if she's there too, so he's guilty as well. Sunday was hell. Our former Warlock being furious that I would allow such a thing to happen when I knew the Paladin and her were still in a relationship in game, and that I had to change it immediately or she would again make sure that I was working every Saturday, as it no longer mattered to her as she was no longer playing. I simply said that I would move it to another day and she had no say in what happened at my table. She was less than pleased. I worked the next 3 Saturdays and moved the game to Sunday or Friday respectively, DMPCing the fighter upon his request when he couldn't make the game night. Again, key events that there's no possible way that she'd know about kept cropping up in the form of snide remarks and curt comments. I presumed that the Paladin had been letting slip or that someone had said something, but all the players at the table swore that they had said nothing. It took almost 2 months to find out that she was accessing the Paladin's Google Drive and reading his notes. Wait, so you're telling me that he put in the notes that he was going to sleep with the patron? I don't know if you had to put those notes in there, buddy. We only found out that he had changed his phone and had to reset his Google password, a password I should point out that he had never shared with our former Warlock. This led to a full-on fit in work when she demanded to know what had happened in game. When we refused to answer, she called our Paladin and demanded he tell her. He refused, pulled on her accessing his Google Drive, and after a bit of a screaming match in her office, apparently dumped her there and then, as he couldn't trust her. This doubled down when both the fighter and I requested a team transfer due to internal differences and toxic work environment, which thanks to her little fit was now office public knowledge. The game was suspended for a week or 2 while the fighter and myself moved to another team and got our schedules aligned, and the game carried on from that point as normal. Work did get a little rough as I was being badmouthed quite aggressively, but that ended when the fighter and I started working from home thanks to the plague times, and the game moved to Discord. Suffice to say, snuggle time is now off my table between players. As for the former Warlock player, boyfriend, lost. D&D, lost. Respect at work, lost. Friends and colleagues, also lost. Due to her blow-up at work, she also lost her respect and chances of leading additional teams as she blew up in the office. She had 2 strikes now against her from her reports of toxic workplace-based behavior and verbal assault to employees, which ended up in her losing her position as a team lead when lockdown happened and is unlikely to get it back due to those reports. Hey, in the end, it sounds like a happy ending to me. The problem player did remove themselves from the game, but unfortunately, tying in work politics to D&D made it pretty dicey there for a minute. So that's something that you just always have to keep in mind. I know you're trying to find new friends to play D&D with, and sometimes your coworkers are the perfect people to bring at the table. But then when you start adding work politics, mix it a little bit with romance, something's bound to break eventually. Now, I'm not saying never allow your boss to be in your D&D campaign or a couple to be in your D&D campaign, but just just things to keep in mind. I really have to commend this warlock. The amount of pettiness that you have to reschedule someone so they lose their +1 item just because your boyfriend said, oh man, I could have used that, that would have been pretty cool, is kind of crazy. And the fact that, you know, immediately the paladin's like, no, it's fine. I mean, it's D&D. I could just ask for the next dungeon to have a +1 weapon that I want that's a better fit. No, this warlock has to save the day for her boyfriend and ends up blowing up her financial future and the relationship too in the end. I'm just kind of sitting here dumbfounded with how badly it turned out for the warlock. At least you don't have to deal with them at the table anymore. I hope you guys enjoyed this story. Make sure to like and share the video. Comment what your thoughts are on this story because I think it's definitely one of the more wild ones I've covered. And I hope to see you in the next video. Farewell for now.